I stood on stage clutching my master's degree, hands shaking from pure exhaustion. 48 hours later, my father handed my younger sister a promotion with 3 times my salary in front of the entire staff. I didn't scream. I simply quit and vanished exactly when they needed me most. But the real twist wasn't my departure. It was the invisible map I accidentally took with me. Now the company is paying the price. Would you go back to save them? My name is Chloe Lopez, and the paper in my hand was supposed to be a shield. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with the university seal embossed in gold foil that caught the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. Master of Science in Supply Chain Management. It represented 4 years of black coffee, bloodshot eyes, and reading textbooks on logistics optimization while parked at truck stops at 3 in the morning waiting for a driver to swap a blown tire. I had not slept more than 4 hours a night since I was 26. I was 30 years old now, and I felt 50. I placed the diploma gently on the corner of my desk, right next to the 3-inch binder I had spent the last 2 weeks compiling. This was it. The diploma was the credential, but the binder was the leverage. My father, Reed Donovan, sat across from me. He was leaning back in his leather chair, the one that squeaked every time he shifted his weight, which was often. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something irrelevant, probably LinkedIn or a golf forum. He did not look at the diploma. I pushed the binder toward him. I ran the numbers. "Dad," I said. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this in the shower, in the car, in the quiet hum of the server room. Since I took over the operations floor 4 years ago, detention fees are down 60%. Driver retention is up 40% in a market where everyone is bleeding staff. And the new routing software I implemented, it saved the company $112,000 in fuel just in the last 2 quarters. Reed finally looked up. He did not open the binder. He did not even touch it. He looked at me with that familiar, maddening half-smile that suggested I was a child presenting a finger painting rather than the chief operating officer in everything but title. "We are doing well, Chloe," he said, his voice smooth, dismissive. "The whole team is pulling their weight. I am asking for a market correction, Dad," I pressed, keeping my hands clasped on the desk to hide the tremor. "I am making $45,000 a year. The average salary for an operations director in this state, with a master's degree, is $130,000. I am not even asking for the cap. I am asking for 85. That is fair. That is barely market rate for what I deliver." Reed sighed, a long, heavy exhale through his nose. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a theatrical gesture of exhaustion he saved for when I became, in his words, difficult. "Money is tight. Chloe, you know the margins in freight. Fuel is up. Insurance is killing us." "Profit is up 22%, I countered, tapping the binder. "I know because I wrote the financial report you signed last week." He slammed his hand down on the desk. It wasn't violent, just loud enough to silence me. "Enough with the numbers. You are obsessed with the math. But you forget the heart of this business. We are a family company. We make sacrifices." He put his glasses back on and looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. "You are lucky you even have a job here. Chloe, most places would not let you work the flexible hours you did while you were chasing that piece of paper." He nodded vaguely at my diploma. "I carried you while you played student. Do not come in here demanding a payday just because you printed out some charts. Now, I have a lunch meeting." I sat there for a full minute after he left. I looked at the diploma. Lucky. I had worked full-time days, studied full-time nights, and managed the entire fleet on weekends. I had saved Crestfield Event Freight from 3 separate doll audits. I had personally renegotiated the carrier contracts that kept us solvent during the last recession, and he called it carrying me. I stood up, picked up my binder, and walked out. I did not slam the door. I did not cry. I just went back to my desk and processed 47 invoices, because that is what I did. I was the engine. Engines do not complain. They just burn. 48 hours later, the engine seized. It was an all-hands meeting. The warehouse floor was cleared of pallets, and the staff was gathered in a semicircle. There were about 40 of us forklift drivers with calloused hands, dispatchers with headsets still around their necks, and the small sales team. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, dust, and old cardboard. Reed stood on a makeshift podium made of 2 stacked pallets. He was beaming. He looked happier than I had seen him in a decade. "Big changes," Reed boomed, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal ceiling. "Crestfield is evolving. We are moving into a new era. We need fresh eyes. We need dynamic leadership to take our client relationships to the stratosphere." I stood in the back, arms crossed, leaning against a support beam. A cold pit formed in my stomach. I knew what was coming, but my brain refused to process the logic of it. "Please join me in welcoming our new Director of Client Growth," Reed shouted, sweeping his arm toward the office door. "Sloan Donovan." My sister walked out. Sloan was 27. She had spent the last 5 years finding herself in Austin, then Nashville, then Portland. She had started a jewelry line that failed, a lifestyle blog that hadn't updated in 2 years, and had worked briefly as a hostess at a high-end club. She had never negotiated a freight contract. She did not know the difference between a dry van and a reefer unit. She thought LTL was a text message abbreviation. She was wearing a cream blazer that cost more than my car, immaculate heels that clicked sharply on the stained concrete floor, and a smile that was dazzling, practiced, and completely empty. "Hi, everyone," she chirped, waving like she was on a parade float. "Sloan brings a wealth of creative energy," Reed continued, clapping his hands. "She is going to revitalize our brand, and to make sure she has everything she needs to succeed. She will be spearheading our new downtown satellite office." I felt the blood drain from my face. A satellite office we were trying to cut overhead. Reed wasn't finished. "We are setting her up for success. Company vehicle, full expense account, and a dedicated assistant to handle the administrative load so she can focus on the big picture." The warehouse was silent. The drivers looked at each other. They knew who fixed their payroll when it was wrong. They knew who stayed until midnight to route them around snowstorms. They looked at me. I did not move. I felt something inside my chest, right behind my ribs, make a sound. It wasn't a crack. It was a click, soft, metallic, and final, like a deadbolt sliding into place. The applause was scattered and polite. As the meeting broke up, Reed stepped down and hugged Sloan. I walked up to them. My legs felt mechanical. "Congratulations, Sloan," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. "Oh, Chloe." She hugged me, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive vanilla perfume. "Isn't it exciting? Dad says we are going to be such a power team. I have so many ideas for the logo. It is so beige, you know?" I pulled away and looked at Reed. "Director of Client Growth. That is a new title." "It is a necessary role," Reed said, his jaw tightening. "How much?" I asked. "Chloe, not here," he warned. "How much?" "Dad," I repeated. I wasn't shouting. I was barely whispering. "You turned me down for 85. What is she getting?" Reed looked around to ensure no one was listening. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. $150,000, plus commissions. 150, 3 times my salary, for a job that didn't exist, for a girl who had never worked a day of manual labor in her life. "And the car?" I asked. "A Range Rover lease, for image," Reed said, defiant now. "She is the face of the company. Chloe, you are the back office. You do not need a Range Rover to count boxes." "I see," I said. "Do not start with the jealousy," Reed snapped, pointing a finger at my chest. "This is your sister. You should be happy she is finally settling down. You are the stable one. Chloe, you can handle the grind. She needs encouragement. You support her. That is your job. My job." "Understood," I said. I turned around and walked back to my office. I sat down in my chair. The diploma was still there, sitting next to the rejected binder. I moved them both to the side. I opened my email. I had 42 unread messages. A shipment was stuck in Ohio. A client in Chicago needed a quote. A driver had a medical emergency in Phoenix. I answered every single one of them. I worked with a terrifying clarity. I updated the spreadsheets. I approved the payroll. I scheduled the maintenance for the fleet. I worked through lunch. I worked through the afternoon while I heard Sloan and Reed laughing in the conference room, discussing paint colors for her new office. I was not angry. Anger is hot. Anger is messy. This was something else. This was absolute zero. It was the realization that I was not a daughter, and I was not an employee. I was an appliance. A toaster does not get a raise. A toaster does not get thanked. A toaster just makes toast until it burns out, and then you buy a new one. At 6 o'clock, the office emptied out. Reed and Sloan left together to go to a celebratory dinner. They didn't ask me to come. "Don't stay too late," Reed called out over his shoulder. "Remember to lock the gate." "I will," I said. I waited until the taillights of his Mercedes faded from the parking lot. Then I opened my laptop. I opened a blank document. "Dear Mr. Donovan, please accept this letter as formal notification that I'm resigning from my position as operations manager at Crestfield Event. Freight. My last day will be," I typed the date, 2 weeks from today. Standard notice. Professional. Impeccable. My finger hovered over the print button, but then I paused. I minimized the letter and opened the company's shared drive. I looked at the folder structure. It was a labyrinth of data I had built brick by brick over 4 years. I clicked on a subfolder named System Core. Inside was a single, massive Excel file titled Master Routing Logic V9 XSM. It wasn't just a spreadsheet, it was the brain of the company. It contained the macros that calculated pricing based on fuel volatility. It held the proprietary algorithm I wrote to pair drivers with routes to maximize legal driving hours. It contained the contact information for the 3 guys at the rail yard who could rush a container when the port was backed up, contacts that were not in the official CRM, just in my notes and in the logic of this file. I looked at the file properties. Author Chloe Lopez. Reed didn't know how to open this file. Sloan didn't know it existed. The dispatchers used a front-end interface that pulled data from this file, but they didn't know how it worked. If this file broke, or if the links were severed, the dispatch system would revert to manual entry. They would have to route 40 trucks a day using a map and a calculator. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. If I left, they would lose me. That was a staffing problem. But if I took my intellectual property with me, they wouldn't just lose a manager, they would lose the map. I reached into my purse and pulled out a USB drive. "You want me to lock the gate, Dad?" I whispered to the empty room. "I'll lock everything." The drive home from the office that night was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum. I did not turn on the radio. I needed to hear the sound of my own tires on the asphalt, to remind myself that I was actually moving, that I wasn't just stuck in the same loop I had been running for a decade. As the streetlights blurred past, my mind didn't go forward to the resignation letter waiting on my laptop. It went backward. It drifted to the beginning, to the days when I was naive enough to believe that meritocracy was a real thing in the Donovan family. I was 22 when I officially started at Crestfield. I didn't start in an office. I didn't start with a title. I started at 4 a.m. in the dead of winter. Standing on the loading dock with a clipboard in hands that were so cold I couldn't feel the pen. Reed had told me, "To lead the men, you have to know what they do." It sounded like wisdom at the time. It sounded like the opening chapter of a business biography. So, I bought steel-toed boots. I wore a safety vest that smelled like the previous owner's cigarettes. I learned how to strap down a grand piano so it wouldn't shift a millimeter during a cross-country haul. I learned the difference between a bonded carrier and a common carrier the hard way, by cleaning up the mess when a cheap subcontractor dropped a crate of lighting equipment off a liftgate. I remembered one specific morning, about 6 months in. I was covered in hydraulic fluid because a hose had burst on the forklift, and I was the only one small enough to crawl under the chassis to clamp it until the mechanic arrived. My hair was matted with grease. My fingernails were black. Reed had walked by, escorting a potential client through the warehouse. He stopped, pointed at me, his daughter, looking like a mechanic's rag doll, and beamed. "That is dedication," he had told the client. "That is the Donovan work ethic. We get our hands dirty." The client looked impressed. Reed looked proud. And I felt a surge of warmth in my chest. I thought I was earning my stripes. I thought I was paying the admission fee for a future seat at the table. Later that day, in the break room, Reed handed me a bottle of water and squeezed my shoulder. "You are doing good work, Chloe," he said. "Keep this up. Another few years. Once you know every bolt in this building, you will be chief operating officer. You will have equity. This whole empire it is for you kids, but you are the one earning it. Equity, COO. Next few years." The words were always vague enough to be deniable, but specific enough to keep me hungry. The timeline was always next quarter, or when the market stabilizes, or after this big contract lands. I chased that horizon for 8 years. Then there was Sloan. If I was the foundation, buried in the dirt and holding up the weight, Sloan was the weather vane shiny, spinning in the wind, and completely decorative. While I was learning how to audit fuel logs, Sloan was finding herself. That was the family euphemism for quitting things. She dropped out of college 3 times. She moved to Los Angeles to become a stylist, but came back 4 months later because the industry was too toxic. She tried to start a luxury candle business, which consisted of her buying $5,000 worth of wax that sat in our garage until it melted into a singular giant blob during a heat wave. When Sloan quit a job, my mother, Linda, would sigh and say, "Oh, the poor thing. She is just so creative. Her spirit is too big for a 9-to-5. She needs time to heal." When I worked 21 days in a row without a break because we were short-staffed during peak season, Linda would say, "Well, you are so strong. Chloe, you are the responsible one. We do not worry about you. We do not worry about you." They said it like a compliment. It took me a long time to realize it was an exemption clause, because they didn't worry about me. They didn't think about me. My stability gave them the luxury of ignoring my needs. The contrast wasn't just emotional, it was mathematical. I remembered my 16th birthday. I got the family's old Honda Accord. It had 180,000 miles on it. The air conditioning only blew hot air, and the passenger door had to be opened from the inside. I was thrilled. I thought it was a rite of passage. I paid for my own gas. I paid for my own insurance from the money I made filing papers at the office after school. 2 years later, Sloan turned 16. I came home from university for the weekend to find a brand new white Jeep Wrangler with a red bow on the hood parked in the driveway. "It is for safety," my dad had explained. Seeing the look on my face, "Sloan is not. She is not a great driver like you. Chloe, she needs something sturdy. Plus, it holds its value." Sloan crashed it 3 months later. They bought her another one. I drove that Honda until the transmission literally fell out onto the highway. It was the same with money. Every month, I wrote a check for my student loans. I had taken loans for my undergraduate degree because Reed said, "The business is tight right now. Cash flow is tricky." I understood. I took the burden. I paid $350 a month, every month, for 10 years. Meanwhile, Sloan's rent was a recurring line item in the company ledger. It was categorized under miscellaneous consulting. I found it one day while reconciling the books. I asked Reed about it. "Dad, why is the company paying $2,400 a month to a landlord in Austin?" He didn't even look up from his paper. "Sloan is in a bind. Her roommate bailed. We are just helping her bridge the gap until her jewelry business takes off. Do not be petty. Chloe, it is family money." Family money. When I needed a raise to fix my car, it was company money, and we had to respect the budget. When Sloan needed a loft apartment in a trendy district, it was family money, and we had to support each other. I swallowed the bitterness. I told myself the story I needed to survive. I am the reliable one. I am the competent one. One day, the math will matter. One day, they will look at the spreadsheets and see that I am the asset and she is the liability. They are investing in me by letting me run things. But as the years ground on, the reliability started to feel less like a badge of honor and more like a target on my back. I became the fixer. If a driver got arrested for a DUI in Nevada at 2 in the morning, my phone rang. Not Reed's, mine. I handled the bail, the impound, the replacement driver. If a client screamed because their trade show booth arrived damaged, I was the one sent to the convention center to face the firing squad. I apologized. I negotiated the discount. I personally drove back to the warehouse to fetch the spare parts. And when the crisis was over, Reed would sweep in for the wrap-up meeting. He would shake the client's hand, flash his charming, rugged smile, and say, "I am glad we could make this right for you. At Crestfield, we never leave a man behind." The client would leave happy, thinking Reed Donovan was a miracle worker. I would be standing in the background, holding the clipboard, invisible again. I remember one specific incident last year. We had snagged a massive contract with a pharmaceutical company. It was a logistical nightmare, temperature-controlled shipping for delicate lab equipment across 6 states in 3 days. I spent 4 weeks designing the route. I built a custom tracking protocol so the client could see the temperature of every truck in real time. I slept in the office for 3 nights during the execution phase to monitor the fleet. It went perfectly. 0 loss, 0 delays. At the celebration dinner, the VP of the pharmaceutical company raised a glass. "To Reed Donovan," he said, "for having the vision and the operational genius to pull this off. You run a tight ship. Reed." I waited. I waited for Reed to point to me. I waited for him to say, "Actually, my daughter Chloe built the system." Reed stood up, buttoned his jacket, and raised his glass. "Thank you, Jim. It is all about experience. You cannot teach instincts." He didn't look at me. He didn't mention my name. I sat there, sipping my water, and felt a cold realization wash over me. It wasn't that he forgot. It was that he believed it. He genuinely believed that his leadership, which consisted of barking orders and taking long lunches, was the magic ingredient. He thought my work, my systems, my sleepless nights, were just the automatic functions of the machine he owned. He didn't see me as an architect. He saw me as a light switch. You flip it, the light comes on. You don't thank the switch. You don't pay the switch extra. You just expect it to work. Sloane, on the other hand, was the artwork on the wall. She didn't have to do anything. Her value was in her existence. She was bright, bubbly, and projected the image of success that Reed desperately wanted the world to see. She was the Donovan he wanted to be, carefree, rich, stylish. I was the Donovan he actually was, tired, anxious, and grinding gears to keep the illusion moving. That night, driving home after the graduation snub, the question finally formed in my head. It was a terrifying question, one I had been avoiding for my entire adult life. I pulled into the driveway of my small apartment complex, not a loft, just a standard 2-bedroom I paid for myself. I turned off the ignition but didn't open the door. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were clean now, manicured, no longer stained with grease, but I still felt the weight of that safety vest. If I stop working, I thought, staring into the dark. If I stop fixing, stop saving, stop earning, if I stop being useful, am I still loved? Sloane could set a pile of money on fire and they would hug her and tell her it was a learning experience. If I made a rounding error, I was disappointed the family. They loved Sloane for her being. They loved me for my doing. And I was finally, after 30 years, too tired to do any more. I got out of the car. The night air was cool. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, and walked straight to my laptop. The resignation letter was waiting. I wasn't just quitting a job. I was testing a hypothesis. I was about to remove the usefulness from the equation and see if there was anything left of the relationship. My finger hovered over the enter key. I thought about the warehouse at 4 in the morning. I thought about the broken Honda. I thought about the $150,000 salary for a sister who thought a bill of lading was a type of duck. I pressed send. It was done. The engine had officially cut the fuel line. But as I sat back, watching the sent notification fade. I remembered the USB drive in my purse, the master routing logic. I hadn't just quit. I had taken the keys to the kingdom, and tomorrow, when the sun came up, Reed Donovan was going to try to start his car, and for the first time in his life, the engine wouldn't turn over. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It was the first breath of air I had taken in years. To understand why I walked away, you have to understand what I built. You have to understand that Crestfield Event Freight was not a company when I took over the floor. It was a panic attack with a tax ID number. Before I implemented the systems, the warehouse ran on what my father called instincts and what I called gambling. Every morning was a roll of the dice. We had drivers showing up to the wrong loading docks in the wrong states. We had expensive audio-visual equipment vanishing into the ether, simply because someone forgot to write it down on a clipboard that had been missing since 2015. I remember the day that broke me, the day I decided that instincts were going to bankrupt us. It was 3 years ago. We were handling the logistics for a massive tech launch in San Francisco. The client needed 40 custom-built truss structures delivered by 6 in the morning. The trucks arrived at 8. 2 of them were empty. It turned out the warehouse manager, a buddy of my dad named Rick, had felt like the other 2 trucks were loaded because he saw them parked by the bay. He never checked inside. We paid $40,000 in penalty fees that day. We lost the client forever. Reed laughed it off later, saying, "You win some, you lose some." I stopped laughing. I started coding. I spent the next 6 months turning myself into the most hated person in the building because I took away their freedom to be sloppy. I started with the inventory. I bought a thermal label printer and 3,000 rolls of high-durability synthetic tags. I spent my weekends every single Saturday and Sunday for 2 months crawling over trusses, speakers, cables, and road cases. I tagged everything. If it was an asset worth more than $50, it got a barcode. I created a digital twin of the warehouse on a server I set up in the back closet. I forced every single employee, from the newest loader to the senior drivers, to carry a scanner. If it does not beep, it does not leave. I told them. They complained. They called me the scan Nazi behind my back. They said I was slowing them down. Reed told me I was being too rigid, that I was killing the flow. The flow is costing us 12% of our annual revenue in lost gear. Dad, I told him, the flow is bleeding us dry. I didn't stop at the gear. I went after the routing. Before, dispatching was done on a giant whiteboard that was half erased and totally illegible. A driver would get a call while he was already on the highway, telling him to turn around because we forgot a pallet. I killed the whiteboard. I implemented a dynamic routing software usually reserved for companies 10 times our size. I entered every variable manually: truck height, weight limits, driver hours of service, traffic patterns, fuel prices. I created zones. Zone A was local, Zone B was regional, Zone C was long haul. I assigned drivers based on skill and fatigue levels, not just who raised their hand first. The results were not subtle. They were violent. In the first quarter after the system went live, our lost equipment costs dropped to near zero. We stopped paying penalty fees for late arrivals because the software flagged potential delays 4 hours before they happened, giving us time to fix them. Our insurance premiums dropped by 18% because I instituted a mandatory pre-trip safety checklist that had to be digitally signed before the engine could even turn over. No more, "I forgot to check the tires." If you didn't check the tires, the tablet wouldn't let you view your route. We started winning contracts we had no business touching. We landed the logistics for a national medical conference, a 3-year deal worth $2 million, solely because I could show their compliance officer a real-time audit trail of every single item in our custody. "Your chain of custody is tighter than FedEx," the auditor had told me. I brought that contract to Reed. I put it on his desk. "This covers the cost of the software, the scanners, and my salary for the next 10 years, I said. Reed smiled, signed the contract, and bought himself a new set of golf clubs the next week. My title remained Operations Manager. My salary went up by a cost of living adjustment of 3%. There was no bonus. There was no profit sharing. There was no equity. "We are reinvesting in the company," Reed said. I knew reinvesting meant paying off the credit cards Sloan had maxed out. But I didn't say it. I just worked harder. That was when I decided to go back to school. I realized that if I wanted to be taken seriously, if I wanted to force Reed to see me as a partner and not a glorified secretary, I needed credentials that he couldn't argue with. I applied for a Master of Science in Supply Chain Management. For 2 years, my life was a blur of caffeine and diesel fumes. I would work a 10-hour shift on the floor, managing a crew of 30 men. Then, at 6 in the evening, when the office lights went down, I would open my textbooks. I studied linear programming and statistical analysis while the cleaning crew vacuumed around my feet. I wrote my thesis on last-mile optimization in high-volatility logistics, sitting in the cab of a standby truck while waiting for a shipment to clear customs at 2 in the morning. My laptop was balanced on the steering wheel, the blue light illuminating the dark cabin. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. My body started to send me signals that I was redlining. I developed a tremor in my left hand. My stomach was a knot of constant, burning acid. I stopped eating lunch because the nausea was too intense. I lost 15 pounds I didn't have to lose. There was a Tuesday last November. It was peak season. We were moving 4 shows simultaneously. I had been awake for 36 hours straight, coordinating a crisis in Denver where a blizzard had shut down the interstate. I was walking across the warehouse floor to check a manifest when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The concrete floor seemed to rush up to meet me. My vision went white at the edges. I grabbed a racking upright, the cold steel digging into my palm, and held on for dear life. My knees buckled. One of the forklift drivers, a guy named Miller, saw me. He killed his engine and ran over. "Chloe, you all right?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I just breathed, forcing air into lungs that felt too small. "I am fine," I whispered. It was a lie. I was not fine. I was gray. "Just stood up too fast. Need some water." Miller looked at me with genuine worry. "You look like a ghost, boss. Go home. We got this." I didn't go home. I drank a bottle of water, ate a granola bar that tasted like cardboard, and went back to my desk. When my mother called me later that week and I mentioned I was tired, she gave me the same line she always did. "You are so strong, Chloe. You get that from your grandmother. We Donovans are workhorses. You can handle it." It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. By telling me I was strong, she was absolving herself of the need to help me. If I was strong, I didn't need rest. If I was strong, I didn't need fairness. Reed was even worse. When I showed him the efficiency reports, the ones proving that my systems had doubled our throughput capacity without adding a single new truck, he clapped me on the back. "That is the family spirit," he boomed. "This is why I trust you with the keys, kiddo. You just get it done. You do not complain like the others." He loved the results. He loved the money. He loved the prestige of telling his friends at the country club that his company was tech-forward. But he didn't love the architect. I finished my degree. I walked across that stage. I handed him the business case for my raise, and he spat in my face. But the real breaking point wasn't the money. It was a moment, just a day before I quit, when I was showing Reed how to approve a complex override in the new system I had built. He was staring at the screen, glossing over. He waved his hand dismissively. "I do not need to learn this technical mumbo-jumbo. Chloe," he said, laughing. "That is why you are here. You are the only one who understands how this machine works. As long as you are here, I do not need to know a thing." He smiled at me, thinking he was giving me job security. But as I looked at him, I didn't feel secure. I felt the cold, hard click of a shackle. He wasn't telling me I was valuable. He was telling me I was trapped. He had built a cage out of my own competence, and he expected me to sit inside it and keep the lights on while he and Sloan played in the sun. "Only you understand this," he had said. I looked at the complex web of algorithms on the screen. He was right. Only I understood it, and that meant only I could take it apart. I did not storm into Reed's office the morning after graduation. That would have been emotional. And if there was one thing I had learned in 4 years of running a logistics floor, it was that emotion is the enemy of leverage. Emotion is how you make mistakes. Emotion is how you miss a decimal point or sign a bad contract. So, I waited. I waited exactly 3 weeks. I watched the daily reports. I waited for a week where the numbers were perfect green across the board. 0 late deliveries, fuel costs under budget, and a client retention rate that had hit 99%. I wanted the backdrop of our conversation to be undeniable success. I wanted the silence of a smoothly running engine to be the soundtrack to my request. On a Tuesday morning, when the warehouse was humming with the organized rhythm I had conducted, I sent a calendar invite to my father. Subject, operational review and compensation adjustment. I walked into his office at 10 in the morning. He was in a good mood. He was looking at a brochure for a new boat, a 40-footer he had been eyeing for the summer season. "Morning, Chloe," he said, not closing the brochure. Everything quiet on the floor. "The floor is perfect, Dad," I said. "That is why I am here." I sat down. I did not smile. I placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. It wasn't the thick binder from before. This was a summary, a 1-page executive brief. I had learned that Reed Donovan did not read binders. He read headlines. "I want to discuss my future at Crestfield," I began. My voice was level, practiced. "I have just completed my Master of Science. I have absorbed the role of Director of Operations for the last 4 years without the title. I have managed the finances, the fleet, and the personnel." I pointed to the paper. "This is a market analysis of my position," I said. I pulled data from 3 major salary aggregators and compared them with similar-sized logistics firms in the Midwest. The median salary for a director of operations with a master's degree and my level of experience is $135,000 a year. Reed finally closed the boat brochure. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes flickering over the paper for less than a second before landing back on me. He looked amused. "I am currently making $45,000, I continued. "That is roughly $17 an hour if I worked a standard 40-hour week. But I do not work 40 hours. I average 72 hours a week. That brings my actual hourly wage down to something closer to $12. The forklift drivers make 20. I paused, letting the number hang in the air. "I am proposing a salary adjustment to $110,000. That is still 20% below market rate. I am also asking for a defined bonus structure tied to net profit, which I have directly influenced by cutting overhead by 15% this year." I stopped. I had made the business case. It was logical. It was fair. It was undeniable. Reed leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked loudly in the silence. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly, a gesture that used to make me nervous but now just made me impatient. "You have been busy with your calculator," he said. His tone wasn't impressed. It was dry. "I am an operations manager," I said. "Calculators are my tools." "You are looking at this all wrong, Chloe," Reed said, shaking his head with a pitying smile. "You are looking at this like a transaction, like you are some consultant I hired off the street. I am an employee. Dad, employment is a transaction." "No," he snapped, his voice suddenly hard. "You are family. This is not a corporation where you punch a clock and demand a check. This is a legacy. You are building something that will be yours one day. You cannot put a price tag on that kind of opportunity." "I cannot pay my rent with opportunity," I said. "And I cannot buy groceries with a legacy that might happen 20 years from now. I am 30 years old. I have debts." "Debts you chose to take on," Reed countered. He waved a hand at the air, as if dismissing my entire education. "That master's degree, I did not ask for that. I did not tell you to go spend 2 years reading books. You did that for yourself. You did that for your ego. Do not bring me the bill for a hobby I did not approve." I felt a cold flush of heat rise up my neck. A hobby. He called a degree in supply chain logistics the very science that kept his company from collapsing a hobby. That degree is the reason we passed the ISO audit last month, I said, keeping my voice steady. That degree is the reason I knew how to restructure the fuel contracts when oil spiked. It is not a hobby. It is an asset, and you are using it for free. Reed stood up. He walked over to the window that overlooked the warehouse floor. He stood there for a long moment, watching the forklifts zip back and forth, forklifts moving on the routes I designed, carrying pallets I had tracked. "You are acting like an outsider, Chloe," he said without turning around. "You come in here with your charts and your demands, talking about market rates and industry standards. You sound like one of those headhunters who try to poach my drivers." He turned to face me. His face was red. "You think you are so special because you went to school. You think that makes you better than me. I built this place with a high school diploma and sweat. I did not need a piece of paper to tell me how to run a business." "I never said I was better," I said. "I said I am valuable, and I am tired. Dad, I am burnt out. I need to know that there is a future here that reflects my contribution. I cannot keep working 70 hours a week for $12 an hour. It is not sustainable." Reed laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Sustainable," he mocked. "You millennials and your burnout. You have a desk job. Chloe, you sit in air conditioning. You want to see burnout. Go talk to the guys in the yard who are throwing 50-pound boxes in the heat. That is work. You are just managing." He walked back to his desk and sat down, opening his email on his screen. He started typing, signaling that the meeting was over. "I am not giving you a raise," he said, his eyes on the screen. "We are putting money back into the business. We have expenses coming up. If you need money, maybe you should cut back on your lifestyle. Move into a cheaper place. Sell that fancy laptop." I sat frozen. My lifestyle. I lived in a studio apartment. I drove a 10-year-old car. I hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. "Is that your final answer?" I asked. Reed stopped typing. He looked at me over the top of his monitor. His eyes were cold, devoid of any fatherly warmth. There was only the boss. Looking at a subordinate, he considered troublesome. "Let me give you some advice. Chloe," he said, "you think you are a hot commodity because you have that degree, but out there in the real world, you are nobody. You are a 30-year-old woman with no experience outside of her daddy's company. No one is going to hire you. No one is going to pay you 6 figures to run a spreadsheet." He leaned forward. "You are here because I allow you to be here. You have a job because I created one for you. If you are not happy with my generosity, then go ahead. Go out there and try. See what the market thinks of you." It wasn't advice. It was a dare. It was a threat. He was betting on my insecurity. He was banking on the fact that he had spent my entire life making me feel small, making me feel like I was only competent because he held the safety net. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I would fold, apologize, and go back to my desk to work another 12-hour day to prove my loyalty. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not throw the paper at him. I reached out and picked up the single sheet of market analysis. I folded it neatly in half, then in half again. "Okay," I said. "Okay what?" Reed asked, already looking back at his screen. "Okay," I repeated. "I understand the position." "Good," he muttered. "Now close the door on your way out. I have real work to do." I walked out of the office. I walked past the dispatch desk. I walked past the break room. I walked out the front door and into the parking lot. I got into my car. It was hot inside, the sun baking the dashboard. I sat there with my hands in my lap. I didn't cry. I expected to cry. I expected to feel devastated that my father had just confirmed, to my face, that he saw me as a charity case rather than a partner. But the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, hollow clarity. It was like the moment after a fever breaks. The heat was gone, leaving only a cool, sharp awareness. He had told me to go try. He had told me I was unhireable. He had told me my value was 0. He was wrong. I looked at the warehouse building one last time. It looked different now. It didn't look like a legacy. It didn't look like an empire. It looked like a building full of problems that I was no longer paid to solve. I started the car and drove away. 2 days passed. I went to work. I did my job. I was silent. I was efficient. I was the machine he wanted me to be. Then, on Friday afternoon, at 4 o'clock, a notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from Reed. It was sent to the entire company. Subject: exciting updates. Leadership team expansion. I stared at the subject line. My stomach dropped. I knew, with a sickening instinct that had nothing to do with data and everything to do with survival, that this was his answer. This was his retaliation. I had dared to ask for my worth, and now he was going to show me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy. I clicked open the email, and I realized that the war had officially begun. The email Reed sent on Friday was not an invitation. It was a summons. All staff mandatory assembly, warehouse floor, 3 p.m. At 2:55, the warehouse machinery fell silent. The hum of the conveyor belts died down. The beep 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 of reversing forklifts ceased, and the heavy roll-up doors were lowered to half-mast to cut the glare of the afternoon sun. The silence was unnatural. In a logistics hub, silence usually meant something was broken. I walked out of my office and joined the rest of the crew. There were about 50 of us standing in the main loading bay. I stood next to Sarah, my lead dispatcher, and Miller, the yard foreman. Miller was wiping grease off his hands with a red shop rag, looking annoyed. "This better be quick," Miller muttered to me. "I have 3 trucks inbound from St. Louis that need to be turned around by 5. "Just listen and smile," I said quietly. Reed walked out onto the floor. He had set up a microphone and a small portable speaker, the kind you would use for a backyard barbecue. It gave a tinny, hollow quality to his voice. "Team," Reed started, tapping the mic. "Can you hear me? Good. I gathered you all here because Crestfield is hitting a milestone. We are growing. We are evolving. And with growth comes the need for new vision." He paused for effect. The drivers shifted their weight. They were paid by the mile, not by the hour, for listening to speeches. "We have mastered the logistics," Reed said, waving a hand vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me. "We move boxes. We do it well. But moving boxes is yesterday's game. Tomorrow is about experience. It is about the feeling our clients get when they choose Crestfield." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. Experienced clients didn't want an experience. They wanted their trade show booths to arrive in Vegas without being smashed to pieces. They wanted boring, predictable reliability. "To lead this charge," Reed boomed, "I am thrilled to announce our new Director of Client Growth. She is going to bring a fresh, dynamic energy to our front-facing operations. Please welcome Sloan Donovan." The door to the administrative wing opened. Sloan walked out. If the setting wasn't so grim, it would have been comical. The warehouse floor was stained concrete, dusty and gray. The staff wore safety vests, steel-toed boots, and jeans worn white at the knees. Sloan was wearing a white blazer that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust in its life. She wore designer jeans and, most absurdly, 3-inch stiletto heels. Click, click, click. The sound of her heels on the concrete was sharp and distinct in the quiet warehouse. Every eye tracked her. Miller looked down at her feet, then at the OSHA safety line painted on the floor that mandated closed-toe, non-slip footwear. And then he looked at me. He raised an eyebrow. I stared straight ahead. Sloan took the mic from Reed. She was beaming. She looked like she was accepting an award, not starting a job. "Hi, everyone," she chirped. "Wow, it is so earthy in here. I love the vibe. It is so industrial chic." A few of the younger packers exchanged confused glances. "Earthy. It smelled like diesel and sweat." "I am so excited to jump in," Sloan continued, using her hands to emphasize her words. "I have been looking at our brand, and I see so much potential for storytelling. We are not just moving freight. We are moving dreams. We are moving the future. I want to create a synergy between our logistics and our lifestyle." Synergy, storytelling, lifestyle. She was speaking a language that meant absolutely nothing to the men and women standing in front of her. These were people who worried about weigh stations and DOT inspections. They didn't care about the story of the freight. They cared about the weight of it. I will be setting up meetings with all the team leads soon to brainstorm how we can elevate our visual identity. Sloan finished. Let's make Crestfield pop. There was a pause. Then, Reed started clapping. The staff followed suit. A polite, confused ripple of applause that died out quickly. All right, back to work, Reed shouted, clearly thinking this was a morale booster. As the crowd dispersed, the murmur of conversation started up. It wasn't angry. That was the thing that stung the most. They didn't hate Sloan. They just didn't respect her. They viewed her as a curiosity, a mascot that Reed had bought. They looked at her the same way they looked at the new coffee machine in the break room, something shiny that would probably break in a month. But they looked at me with pity. I turned to go back to my office, but Reed caught my arm. He was smiling, high on the adrenaline of his performance. Great kickoff, right? He asked. She has got a spark. Chloe, you have to admit it. She is wearing high heels on a warehouse floor. Dad, I said, that is an insurance liability. Reed rolled his eyes. Always the safety monitor. Lighten up. She is not carrying boxes. She is carrying the image. I stopped. We were standing near the loading dock, just out of earshot of the crew, but close enough that I could see Miller watching us from the corner of his eye. You really gave her the package, I said. It wasn't a question. We discussed this, Reed said, his smile fading. I need to hear you say it, Dad, because I need to understand the logic. You told me 3 days ago that the company was too cash poor to bring me to market rate. You told me $110,000 was impossible. Reed sighed, checking his watch. Chloe, but you just hired a director of client growth at $150,000, I said. Plus the car, plus the expense account, plus the assistant. That is $250,000 in new overhead. Where did that money come from? Reed stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low hiss. It is an investment. Sloan brings in new business. You just manage what we already have. You are maintenance. She is growth. Growth costs money. I am not maintenance, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. I am the reason you have a profit margin to spend on her. I built the engine she is going to put stickers on. Reed looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't hide his contempt. You are good at execution. Chloe, I will give you that. You are a grinder. You can stare at a spreadsheet for 10 hours and not blink. But leadership. Real leadership, that is about energy. It is about attitude. It is about walking into a room and making people believe in you. He gestured toward Sloan, who was currently taking a selfie with a forklift. She has that. You do not. You are cold. Chloe, you are rigid. You kill the vibe. That is why she is worth 3 times what you are, because people like her. You cannot put a price on likability. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't about the degree. It wasn't about the hours. It wasn't about the competence. It was personal. He was punishing me for being the serious one. He was punishing me for being the one who told him no when he wanted to spend company money on toys. He was punishing me for being the adult in a family of children. He called it lack of energy. I called it exhaustion from cleaning up their messes. I understand, I said. Good, Reed said, patting my shoulder. Now, help her get set up with the email system. She is locked out of her account. He walked away. I stood there for a moment. The warehouse noise washed over me, the beep of the scanners, the roar of the engines, the shout of men moving heavy things. This was my symphony. I had composed it, and now I was being told I wasn't charismatic enough to conduct it. I walked back to my office. I sat down. It was 3:30. I did not storm out. I did not delete files. I did not scream. I worked. I processed the final batch of invoices for the week. I approved the driver schedule for the weekend. I responded to an email from a client in Detroit about a potential delay. I was professional. I was precise. I was perfect. At 5 o'clock, the office staff started to leave. "Have a good weekend, Chloe," the receptionist called out. "You too," I said. At 5:30, the building was mostly quiet, save for the skeleton crew on the dock. I opened my personal email on my laptop. I pulled up the draft I had written days ago. Subject: resignation. Chloe Lopez. Dear Mr. Donovan, please accept this letter as formal notification of my resignation from my position as operations manager. Effective 2 weeks from today, I will do my best to ensure a smooth transition of my duties during this period. Sincerely, Chloe Lopez. It was short, it was dry, it was exactly the kind of cold, rigid communication Reed claimed to hate. I attached a document titled Transition Outline, PDF. It was a list of my daily tasks. It was 10 pages long. I hit send, then I closed my laptop, put it in my bag, and stood up. I walked out of my office and turned off the lights. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the break room. Sarah, the lead dispatcher, and Miller were sitting there, drinking coffee. They weren't supposed to be there. Their shifts ended 30 minutes ago. They looked up when I walked in. They knew. I didn't have to say it. They had seen Reed yelling at me in the office earlier in the week. They had seen the look on my face during the meeting. In a small company, there are no secrets. "You did it, didn't you?" Sarah asked softly. I nodded. "I just sent the email." Miller put his coffee cup down. He looked tired. He had been with the company for 15 years, longer than I had. "If you go, Chloe," Miller said, his voice gravelly, "this place turns into a circus in a week. You know that. Right? Reed thinks the trucks wrote themselves." "He has Sloan now," I said, a dry smile touching my lips. "She has energy," Miller snorted. "She has a nice blazer. That does not help me when a load shifts on the I-80. Sarah looked at me, her eyes tearing up. "I cannot work for them without you. Chloe, you are the only one who answers the phone when things go wrong. If you leave, I'm going to start looking. I cannot handle Reed on my own." "Me neither," Miller said. "I got a cousin at FedEx. He's been telling me to switch for years." I looked at them. These were my people. I had hired Sarah. I had fought for Miller's raise last year. The instinct to protect them, to stay just to shield them from Reed's incompetence, was overwhelming. It was the same instinct that had kept me here for 4 years. But then I heard Reed's voice in my head. "You are just maintenance. Don't leave because of me." I told them. I kept my voice firm. "And don't stay because of me. Do what is right for you. Do what is right for your families. Reed is betting that we are all too scared to leave. He is betting that we need him more than he needs us." I looked at the warehouse floor one last time. "Prove him wrong," I said. I walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. My car was the only one left in the management row. Sloane's spot, which used to be for visitors, was empty. She had left at 4 to go to happy hour to celebrate her first day. I got into my car and turned the key. As I drove away, a thought struck me. It wasn't about the resignation. It was about what Miller had said. Reed thinks the trucks route themselves. I realized then that Reed didn't just underestimate me. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of his own business. He thought the system was the software I had bought. He thought the process was the handbook I had written, but it wasn't. The system was Sarah knowing which drivers could handle the Chicago route in winter. The system was Miller knowing which loading bay door had a sticky roller and needed an extra shove. The system was me knowing the personal cell phone number of the Port Authority manager. The system was a web of unwritten, undocumented, implicit knowledge that lived entirely in the heads of 3 people. Me, Sarah, Miller. I had just resigned. Sarah and Miller were already polishing their resumes. Reed thought he had bought a self-driving car. He didn't realize he was about to lose the driver, the mechanic, and the navigator all in the same month, and he was left holding the keys to a vehicle he didn't even know how to start. The Monday morning after I left Crestfield did not feel like freedom. It felt like phantom limb syndrome. I woke up at 4 in the morning out of habit. my hand reaching for a phone that was no longer receiving frantic text messages about broken axles in Nebraska. The silence in my apartment was absolute. For the first time in 4 years, no one needed me. I sat with my coffee and opened my laptop. It was time to reintroduce myself to the world, not as Chloe Donovan, daughter of Reed, but as Chloe Lopez, Master of Science in Supply Chain Management. Updating my resume was a surgical process. I stripped away the family name wherever I could. I removed the emotional fluff about dedication and loyalty that I had put in my early drafts. I replaced them with hard data. Reduced overhead by 18%. Negotiated vendor contracts resulting in $200,000 of annual savings. Designed and implemented proprietary routing logic for a fleet of 40 trucks. I sent the applications out like precision strikes. I did not blast every company on LinkedIn. I targeted the heavy hitters in the Midwest Logistics Corridor: Columbus, Indianapolis, Louisville. These were the hubs where the real freight moved, far away from the boutique, ego-driven chaos of my father's kingdom. The response was almost immediate. By Wednesday, I had 3 interviews scheduled. By Friday, I had completed 2 of them. The interviews were jarring. I was used to meetings with Reed where I had to fight to be heard over his anecdotes about his golf game. I was used to being interrupted. I was used to having my data dismissed as boring. These interviews were different. I sat in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Indianapolis, across from a panel of 3 operations directors for a major pharmaceutical distributor. They did not ask me who my father was. They did not ask me if I planned to have children. They asked me about my thesis on last-mile volatility. They asked me how I handled the driver shortage crisis of 2021. When I explained my routing algorithm, the one I had built from scratch in Excel because Reed wouldn't pay for a transport management system, the lead interviewer stopped taking notes and looked at me. "You built a dynamic logic gate in Excel?" he asked, his eyebrows raised, without a macro breakdown. "I wrote the macros myself," I said. "It was the only way to bypass the legacy software restrictions we had." He looked at his colleagues. "That is impressive. That is actually terrifyingly efficient." For the first time in my professional life, I was not being tolerated. I was being studied. I was being respected. The following Tuesday, I received a call from a number with a Chicago area code. "Chloe Lopez," a deep voice asked. "This is Elias Thorne. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Summit Harbor Event Freight." I froze. Summit Harbor was the apex predator of our industry. They were the ones who handled the Super Bowl, the political conventions, the massive stadium tours. Crestfield was a speedboat. Summit Harbor was an aircraft carrier. "Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I know who you are." "Good," he said, "because I know who you are, or rather, I know your work. We have been seeing Crestfield pop up on bid lists against us for the last 2 years. You guys used to be a joke. Frankly, sloppy, late. Then, about 3 years ago, you started hitting your windows within 15 minutes. You started undercutting our fuel estimates. I asked around. I wanted to know who hired a new logistics firm." He paused. "My sources told me Reed Donovan didn't hire anyone. They told me his daughter took over the floor." I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't sadness. It was the overwhelming sensation of being seen. While Reed was busy taking credit for my instincts, the market had been watching the data. The market knew that instincts didn't cut fuel costs by 12%. "I am looking for a regional director of operations for our Midwest division." Elias continued. "I do not want an interview. I have seen your results. I want to send you an offer." The offer letter arrived in my inbox an hour later. I stared at the numbers. Base salary, $165,000. Performance bonus, up to 30% of annual salary based on KPI targets. Benefits, full medical, dental, and vision. Paid 100% by the company. Retirement, 4% match on the 401k. Vacation, 4 weeks of paid time off, plus sick leave. It was almost comical. I had begged my father for $110,000, and he had laughed at me. Here was a stranger, a competitor, offering me nearly 50% more than that without me even asking. There was a section at the bottom for work environment. It listed a hybrid schedule: 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. I printed the letter. I signed it with a blue pen. I scanned it and sent it back. I did not post about it on social media. I did not send a smug text to Reed. I just sat in my small apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and felt a profound sense of peace. I was not a daughter anymore. I was a professional. I had value that could be measured, contracted, and paid for. I spent the rest of the week preparing for my move. I found a nice apartment in Chicago, close to the Summit Harbor headquarters. I started packing boxes. I felt like I had escaped orbit. The gravity of the Donovan family drama was fading, becoming a small, distant dot in my rearview mirror. Then, on Friday morning, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from my credit monitoring app. Alert: new inquiry. First National Bank of the Midwest. Type: hard inquiry. I frowned. I hadn't applied for any credit. I had signed a lease. But that was a soft check, and it was done 3 days ago. This was a hard pull. The kind that happens when you are applying for a mortgage or a massive loan. Then another notification popped up. Alert: account status change. Crestfield Holdings, LLC. Commercial line of credit. Status review. My blood ran cold. I opened the app. I navigated to the details. There was a commercial line of credit attached to my name. A guarantee. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and closed my eyes. I forced my brain to rewind. I went back 3 years. It was a Tuesday. Reed was rushing out the door to a golf tournament. He had thrown a stack of papers on my desk. "Sign these. Chloe," he had said. "It is just the renewal for the warehouse lease and the revolver credit for the fuel cards. The bank needs an officer's signature because I am technically out of office today." "Did you read them?" I had asked. "Of course I read them," he had snapped. "Just sign it. The trucks need fuel tomorrow, and if this isn't faxed by noon, the cards get declined." I had signed because the drivers were my responsibility, and I couldn't let them get stranded at a pump in Iowa. I had signed as operations manager, believing I was signing as an authorized agent of the company. I scrambled to my laptop. I had a folder called Archives. I kept a digital copy of everything I ever signed. It was a habit born of paranoia, and today, it was the only thing standing between me and ruin. I found the PDF. Commercial Credit Renewal 2022. PDF. I scrolled past the standard legalese. I scrolled to the signature page. There it was, my signature. But my eyes drifted up to the small print above the signature line. It didn't say authorized agent. It said joint and several guarantor. Reed had tricked me, or he had been too lazy to read it himself and didn't care. Either way, the result was the same. I was personally liable for the company's revolving credit line. If Crestfield defaulted on its fuel bills, the bank wouldn't just go after the company assets. They would come for me. They would come for my savings, my car, and my future wages. And the notification meant that someone likely Sloan was trying to expand that credit line. They were trying to borrow more money, and because my name was still on the active guarantee, the bank was checking my credit to see if I was good for it. I felt a surge of nausea, even from a distance, even after I had quit. Reed was still using me as a battery to power his machine. I did not call Reed. Calling him would give him the satisfaction of knowing he still had leverage. He would tell me to calm down, that it was just a formality, that I should be a good daughter and help the family out. I was done being a good daughter. I picked up my phone and called a lawyer I had met during my master's program, a sharp woman named Jessica who specialized in corporate liability. "Jessica," I said as soon as she picked up, "I need to sever a personal guarantee, immediately, and I need to send a cease and desist regarding the fraudulent use of my credit profile." "Send me the documents," Jessica said. "Did they notify you they were increasing the line?" "No," I said. "I found out through a credit alert." "That is bad faith," Jessica said. "Maybe even fraud if they are representing that you are still an active officer. We can crush this. Chloe, but you have to be ready to burn the bridge. Once we send this letter, the bank is going to freeze their credit line until they find a new guarantor, if Reed doesn't have the liquidity to back it himself. He doesn't, I said. He just bought a boat. Then his cash flow stops, Jessica said. The fuel cards stop working. The trucks stop moving. I looked at the Summit Harbor offer letter on my desk. I looked at the boxes. Do it, I said. Draft the letter. Send it to the bank's legal department and copy Reed. Tell them I am no longer an employee, officer, or affiliate of Crestfield Event Freight, and that any attempt to use my credit history is unauthorized. Consider it done, she said. I hung up. My heart was pounding, but it was a steady, rhythmic thud. I wasn't panicked anymore. I was executing a defensive maneuver. I was protecting my perimeter. I sat back at my computer and composed an email to the Crestfield Finance Department, which was basically one overworked woman named Brenda. Subject notice of unauthorized credit usage. Brenda, please be advised that I have retained counsel regarding the personal guarantee attached to the company's revolving credit facility. My legal team has instructed the bank to remove my name immediately. Any further attempts to access my credit file will be met with litigation. I strongly suggest you find a new guarantor before the fuel cards are suspended. Chloe, I hit send. I had just pulled the plug. I knew exactly what would happen. Within 24 hours, the bank would flag the account. They would demand Reed sign a new guarantee. If his credit wasn't good enough and with his recent spending, it probably wasn't, they would lock the account. It was brutal. It was necessary. I was just closing my laptop when my phone buzzed again. I flinched, expecting an angry call from Reed, but it wasn't a call. It was a text message. It was from Marcus, a vendor I had worked with for years. He ran the heavy lift rigging company that supplied the cranes for our biggest jobs. Hey, Chloe. Heard you left. Congrats. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Your sister is renegotiating the safety contracts. I stared at the screen. Safety contracts were non-negotiable. You didn't negotiate gravity. I typed back. What do you mean? The response came 3 dots at a time. Dancing on the screen. She is cutting the secondary inspection requirement. Says it is redundant and slows down the load-in. She wants us to use single-point restraints on the lighter trusses to save on labor hours. My stomach dropped through the floor. Single-point restraints were fine for hanging a banner. They were absolutely illegal for hanging 300 pounds of lighting equipment over a crowd of people. Marcus, do not let her do that. I typed frantically. That is lethal. I told her. Marcus replied. She said she is the director and she wants to streamline the aesthetic. She said the safety cables look ugly in the photos. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about credit scores or business validation. Sloan was stripping the copper wire out of the walls to sell for scrap. And she didn't realize she was cutting the lines that kept the building from burning down. I had walked away to save myself. I had secured my future. I had a new job, a new life, and a lawyer to fight my battles. But as I looked at that text message, I realized that the map I had taken with me wasn't just a routing guide. It was the safety manual. And without it, Crestfield wasn't just going to go bankrupt, it was going to kill someone. The first sign of the collapse was not an explosion, it was a font change. 2 weeks after I started at Summit Harbor, sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the Chicago skyline, I received a photo text from Miller. It was a picture of the side of a Crestfield truck. The old, blocky, reliable navy blue lettering was gone. In its place was a swooping, abstract silver shape that looked vaguely like a bird, or perhaps a plane crashing. Underneath it, in a thin minimalist typeface, were the words, Crestfield, Logistics Reimagined. Miller had added a caption, cost $25,000 to repaint the fleet. Meanwhile, Truck 19 needs a new transmission and we are just topping off the fluid every morning. I stared at the image. It was the perfect summary of the new regime. Sloan was prioritizing the wrapper over the candy. She was spending capital on the things people saw while starving the things that made the company work. From my vantage point in Chicago, I watched the dominoes begin to fall. I didn't need a spy. I just needed to watch the market. It started with the streamlining. That was Sloane's favorite word. She decided that the rigorous inventory checks I had implemented, the scan-in, scan-out protocol that required every item to be verified before it left the dock, were friction points. "We need to be agile," she reportedly told the team. "We trust our people. We do not need to police them with scanners every 5 minutes." So, the scanners were shelved. The barcodes I had spent months applying started to peel off, and nobody replaced them. The warehouse went back to the honor system. In logistics, the honor system is just a fancy term for lost cargo. Within 3 weeks, the error rate spiked. A crate of audio monitors meant for a concert in Detroit ended up in a warehouse in Cleveland. A pallet of trade show carpeting was marked as shipped, but was found 3 days later sitting behind a dumpster in the Crestfield yard. But Sloane didn't see these as systemic failures. She saw them as isolated incidents, bad luck, or negative energy from the staff. I heard about the positivity meeting from Sarah. Sloane had gathered the dispatchers and drivers in the break room. She had printed out colorful posters with slogans like "Solutions, not problems," and "Manifest your mileage." "We are hearing a lot of 'we can't' lately," Sloane had told them, pacing back and forth in her designer heels. "When a client asks for a delivery window, we do not say, 'We can't make that.' We say, 'Let's make it happen.' We need to be a yes company." Miller had raised his hand. "We are saying, 'We can't,' because the drivers are maxing out their legal hours. Sloane, if we push them, we violate DOT regulations, we get fined, or someone falls asleep at the wheel." Sloane had sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "That is a very limiting mindset. Miller, we need to be creative with the logs. We need to be flexible. Creative with the logs. That is federal fraud." Because I had severed the personal guarantee on the credit line, cash flow was becoming a stranglehold. The bank had frozen the revolving credit just as Jessica had predicted. Reed had to scramble to put up personal assets, likely leveraging the house or his new boat, to get the fuel cards turned back on. But the liquidity was gone. Vendors smelled blood. The truck repair shop that used to give us net 30 payment terms now demanded payment on delivery. The temp agencies that supplied extra labor for big loads started refusing to send bodies until past invoices were cleared. So, Sloane stopped doing maintenance. "If the truck starts, it runs," became the unwritten rule. Oil changes were skipped. Tire rotations were ignored. The fleet, which I had kept in pristine condition, began to groan. Then came the crown jewel. It was the annual Global MedTech Expo. This was the contract I had won 3 years ago, the one that paid the bills for the entire third quarter. It was a massive, high-stakes operation involving the transport of multi-million-dollar robotic surgical equipment to the convention center in downtown Indianapolis. The client, BioCore, was demanding. They required white-glove service, climate-controlled transport, and a setup window that was razor-thin. I knew this contract inside and out. I knew that you needed 4 crews, not 2. I knew you needed the air ride suspension trucks, not the standard springs, or the vibration would decalibrate the robots. I knew you needed to stage the trucks in the marshalling yard at 3 a.m. to beat the union labor queue. Sloane didn't know any of this, and because she had alienated Miller and Sarah, they stopped trying to tell her. She saw the contract value $200,000, and she saw a chance to prove she was a rainmaker. She double-booked the fleet. To maximize revenue, she scheduled the BioCore job on the same weekend as a massive pop-up retail installation for a fashion brand, a cool client she had courted on Instagram. She promised both clients full attention. She promised both clients the A-team. There was only one A-team. On the Friday before the expo, the cracks turned into a canyon. I was in my office at Summit Harbor when my phone rang. It was the logistics manager for BioCore. He didn't know I had left Crestfield. He had my personal number from our years of working together. "Chloe, where the hell are the trucks?" he shouted. "The marshalling yard opened 40 minutes ago. Our slot is vanishing. If we miss the dock time, the union stewards are going to push us to the back of the line. We will miss the opening keynote." I felt a phantom panic, a reflex to jump up and fix it. Then I remembered my circus. I am sorry, David, I said calmly. I do not work for Crestfield anymore. You need to call their main dispatch line. There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, terrified silence. You left, oh my God. That explains why the woman on the phone told me to trust the universe when I asked for a GPS ETA. I am sorry, I repeated. I hung up, but I couldn't look away. I pulled up the industry forums on my second monitor. News travels faster than light in logistics. The threads were already starting. User indie rigging. Anyone else at the convention center seeing the disaster at Bay 4 Crestfield truck just showed up with a blown radiator, leaking coolant all over the loading ramp. Hazmat team is shutting down the lane. User Expo Manager. It gets worse. They opened the back. No straps. The load shifted. I heard the crash from the mezzanine. I closed my eyes. No straps. Sloan had probably told them straps were overkill or took too long. The disaster was unfolding in real time. Because Sloan had prioritized the fashion client, she had sent the best trucks and the most experienced drivers to the pop-up shop. She had sent the older trucks, the ones with the skipped maintenance, to the medical expo. And she had staffed them with temp labor because the regular crews were double booked. The truck with the blown radiator was just the beginning. 2 hours later, a second truck arrived. This one was carrying the custom-built lighting truss for the main booth. When the crew opened the doors, the truss wasn't there. It was sitting in a warehouse in Ohio. The honor system inventory check had failed. The driver had grabbed the wrong pallet, a pallet of generic pipe and drape instead of the custom aluminum grid. BioCore had a booth that cost $500,000 to design, and they had no lights. The penalty clauses in the BioCore contract were savage. I knew because I had negotiated them. For every hour of delay, the penalty was $5,000. If the booth wasn't ready by opening, the penalty was the full cost of the contract plus damages. By noon, the damage was estimated at $50,000. By 2 o'clock, BioCore's legal team had sent a breach of contract notice. And then, Reed arrived. I heard this part from Miller later that night. Miller had been on the scene, driving one of the few functional trucks, trying to salvage what he could. Reed rolled up in his Mercedes, wearing a suit, looking like a statesman coming to survey a minor inconvenience. He walked onto the loading dock, stepping over the puddle of coolant that was being soaked up with kitty litter. "All right, everyone, calm down," Reed had shouted, flashing his famous smile. "We are going to sort this out. Minor hiccups. Let's just get the gear inside, shall we?" The BioCore VP of Operations was standing there. He was purple with rage. "Minor hiccup," the VP screamed. "My surgical robot is recalibrated because your driver hit a pothole in a truck with bad shocks. My lighting rig is in another state, and your director won't answer her phone." Reed looked around. "Where is Sloan?" Sloan wasn't there. She was at the fashion pop-up, taking photos for Instagram. "I will handle this," Reed said, puffing out his chest. "I am taking command. Miller, get me the routing manifest. I want to see where the backup truck is." Miller just looked at him. "There is no routing manifest." "Reed," Miller said. "What do you mean?" "Check the system. Check Chloe's file." "The file is gone," Miller said. "Sloan had it archive it because it was old data. We are running on paper tickets, and the driver with the backup truck. He timed out on his hours an hour ago. He is parked at a rest stop 30 miles away. He legally cannot move until tomorrow morning." Reed stared at him. He pulled out his phone. "I will override it. I will authorize the overtime." "You cannot override federal law with a phone call." "Reed," Miller said, his voice tired and heavy with the weight of the day. "And even if you could, we do not have the parts. The inventory count was wrong. The system says we have spares. The shelf is empty." Reed stood there, surrounded by the chaos of the loading dock, the shouting Teamsters, the furious client, the leaking truck. He looked at his phone, then at the empty truck, then at Miller. For the first time, the reality pierced his delusion. He had always believed that the business ran on his personality. He thought the trucks moved because he ordered them to. He thought the clients stayed because he bought them steak dinners. He didn't realize that the business ran on a million tiny, invisible details: the maintenance schedules, the routing logic, the inventory audits, the compliance checks. He didn't realize that those details were a language he didn't speak. He turned to the BioCore VP. "Jim, look, we go way back. Let me make a call." "Don't call anyone," Jim said, his voice icy. "Get your junk off my dock. We are hiring Summit Harbor to bring in emergency gear. And Reed, you will be hearing from our lawyers about the equipment damage." Reed watched as the Summit Harbor trucks, my new trucks, started to roll into the adjacent bay. Clean, on time, and professional. He looked for someone to blame. He looked for someone to fix it. He looked for me. But I wasn't there. I was 200 miles away, reviewing a successful quarterly report, while my father stood in the wreckage of his own arrogance, holding a set of keys to a machine that had stopped working the moment I walked out the door. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the BioCore disaster. I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment in Chicago, watching the city lights flicker like a distant, silent server room. I had a glass of wine in my hand and a spreadsheet open on my lap, but I wasn't working. I was just breathing. When the screen lit up with the name Dad, I didn't feel the old spike of adrenaline. I didn't feel the urge to answer immediately, to apologize for missing the call, to ask what was wrong. I just stared at it. I let it ring 4 times before I slid my thumb across the glass. "Hello, Reed?" I said. There was a pause on the other end. He wasn't used to being called by his first name. It was a small boundary, a brick in the wall I was building. "Chloe," he said. His voice sounded ragged, like he had been shouting for hours and was now running on fumes. "We need to talk." "I am listening," I said. "The BioCore situation, it is a mess," he admitted. It was the closest he had ever come to an apology, though he didn't actually say the word. "The lawyers are all over us. The insurance company is threatening to drop coverage because of the negligence claim on the strapping. We are bleeding. Chloe." "I heard," I said calmly. "It sounds expensive." "It is not just money," Reed snapped, his patience fraying instantly. "It is the reputation. It is the legacy. Look, I am willing to overlook the way you left. I am willing to put it behind us. We need you back, just for a few months, just to steady the ship until we get through this quarterly crisis." I took a sip of wine. Overlook the way I left. He was still framing this as my transgression, as if my resignation was a teenage tantrum rather than a strategic exit from a burning building. "I have a job, Reed," I said. "A full-time job. I am the regional director for Summit Harbor. I cannot just come back." "Take a leave of absence," he demanded. "Tell them you have a family emergency, because you do. This is your family. Chloe, we are drowning here." "I can offer consulting services," I said. I had prepared for this moment. I switched into business mode. "But the terms will be different. I am not coming back as an employee. I will come back as an external crisis management consultant." Fine, whatever you want to call it," Reed said dismissively. "Just get down here tomorrow." "We need to discuss the rate and the scope first," I said. "Rate?" Reed laughed. A dry, incredulous sound. "Chloe, stop playing games. You come in, you fix the routing, you talk to the vendors. We will put you back on payroll at your old salary plus, say, 10%. That is generous considering the circumstances." I nearly dropped my glass. "My old salary was $45,000, I said. "You want me to fix $1 million liability for $22 an hour?" "It is temporary," Reed shouted. "Here are my terms," I cut over him. My voice was ice. "My consulting rate is $250 an hour, minimum retainer of 20 hours a week, paid up front, and I need a signed contract stating that I have full operational autonomy. That means I have the authority to override anyone on the floor, including Sloan." There was a silence on the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. "You want to charge your own father $250 an hour?" Reed whispered. "After everything I gave you, I put a roof over your head. I gave you your first job, And now, when I'm on my knees, you want to send me a bill? I am charging the market rate for a specialist, I said. Actually, I am giving you a discount. Summit Harbor bills my time out to clients at $400 an hour. This is family, Reed roared. The sound distorted the speaker on my phone. Family does not count hours. Family does not write contracts. We help each other because that is what we do. No, I said. Family does not call exploitation loyalty. Reed, you paid Sloan $150,000 to crash the company. You can pay me a fraction of that to save it, or you can let it burn. It is a business decision. You are cold, he spat. You are unrecognizable. I am a professional, I said. Let me know if you want the contract. I hung up. My hand was shaking. Just a little. It wasn't fear. It was the aftershock of cutting a cord that had been wrapped around my neck for 30 years. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Mom, this was the second wave. The good cop. The guilt. Chloe? Her voice was wet. She had been crying. Oh, Chloe, why are you doing this to your father? He is sitting at the kitchen table holding his head. He looks so old. Honey, I am scared he's going to have a heart attack. I closed my eyes. This was the weapon they always used. Reed's health, Reed's stress, as if his blood pressure was my responsibility to manage. I am sorry he is stressed. Mom, I said gently. But he created this situation. He hired Sloan. He ignored the safety protocols. Sloan is just a girl, my mother pleaded. She made a mistake. She is trying so hard. She is crying in her room right now because she feels like she let everyone down. You are the big sister, Chloe. You are supposed to fix it. That is what you do. I am not the fixer anymore, I said. Think about the others. She pivoted. Think about Miller. Think about Sarah. If the company goes under, they lose their pensions. They lose their health insurance. Miller has that baby on the way. Can you really live with yourself knowing you could have saved their jobs but you didn't because you were too proud to help? The knife twisted. She knew exactly where to aim. She knew I loved the crew. She knew I felt a deep, protective obligation to the people who actually did the work. If Miller loses his job, I said, my voice hardening, it is because Reed and Sloan drove the company into a wall. It is not because I refused to be the airbag. They are adults. Mom, they made decisions. Now they have to pay the price for them. I don't know who you are anymore, she sobbed. Money has changed you. Money hasn't changed me, I said. It just gave me the ability to say no. I hung up again. I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the city. I felt like a villain. That is the insidious thing about toxic families. They train you to believe that protecting yourself is an act of aggression. 2 days later, Reed emailed me. Subject meeting request. Chloe, let's meet halfway. There is a coffee shop in Merrillville. Thursday at 10. I want to discuss a formal arrangement. I drove to Merrillville. It was neutral ground, an hour from Chicago and an hour from the warehouse. Reed was sitting in a booth when I arrived. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken. He was wearing a suit, but the collar was unbuttoned, his tie loose. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. For a second, my heart broke. He was my dad. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him I would come back and fix the routing and call the insurance company and make the bad noise go away. But then I saw the folder on the table. I sat down. I didn't order coffee. I drew this up, Reed said, sliding a document toward me. It is a letter of intent. It outlines a new role for you, Senior Vice President of Operations. I opened the folder. The title was there. Senior Vice President. The salary was there. $120,000. It was close to what I had asked for initially, though still below my current pay at Summit Harbor, but I skipped the numbers. I looked for the reporting structure. I found it on page 2. Paragraph 3. The Senior Vice President of Operations will oversee logistical execution and fleet maintenance. This role will work in tandem with the strategic vision of the company and will report to the Director of Client Growth, for all client-facing prioritization and brand alignment. I stared at the sentence. Report to the Director of Client Growth. Report to Sloan. They still didn't get it, even now. With the ship taking on water, with the lawsuits piling up, with the vendors revolting, they were still trying to protect the hierarchy. They wanted my brain, but they wanted Sloan to hold the leash. They wanted me to do the work, but they wanted Sloan to have the final say on prioritization, which meant she could still double-book trucks if she thought it was good for the brand. I closed the folder. No, I said. Reed looked stunned. What did you read the title? It is VP. Chloe, it is what you wanted. I read the reporting line, I said. You want me to report to Sloan? It is a dotted line, Reed argued. It is just for coordination. She handles the clients. You handle the trucks. You have to be on the same page. She is the face of the company. Chloe, you cannot undermine her. She is incompetent. Dad, I said. I said it loudly enough that the barista looked over. She is the reason you are in this mess, and you want me to ask her permission to do my job. You want me to let a 27-year-old fashion blogger decide which trucks are safe to drive. She is learning. Reed slammed his hand on the table. Why are you so jealous of her? I am not jealous, I said, standing up. I am terrified of her. She is dangerous, and you are enabling her. I pushed the folder back across the table. I offered you a consulting deal. You rejected it. This offer insults my intelligence. I am done. Dad, do not call me again unless it is a lawyer. I walked out of the coffee shop. I got in my car and drove back to Chicago, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was shaking with rage. They were willing to burn the whole thing down rather than admit that the golden child was flawed. But the real blow came the next week. I was in the break room at Summit Harbor, getting a coffee. Elias Thorne walked in. He looked uncomfortable. Chloe, got a minute? Sure, I said. I wanted you to hear this from me, Elias said, leaning against the counter. I was at the Regional Logistics Association dinner last night. I sat next to the VP of Biocore. My stomach tightened. Okay. There is a rumor going around, Elias said quietly. The word is that the Biocore disaster happened because you sabotaged the routing system before you left. People are saying you deleted the files and scrambled the inventory codes as revenge for being passed over for a promotion. I felt the blood drain from my face. That is a lie. I archived the files. I handed everything over. I know that, Elias said. I have seen your work, but the narrative out there, it is ugly. Chloe, they are saying you were fired for being uncooperative and difficult, and that you retaliated by destroying company property. Reed is telling people he is heartbroken that his daughter would do this to the family business. I stood frozen. It was Sloan. It had to be. This was her brand of warfare. She couldn't fix the trucks, so she fixed the story. She was rewriting history to make herself the victim and me the villain. She was using my departure to explain away her incompetence. Chloe broke the system. Chloe deleted the files. Poor Sloan is just trying to pick up the pieces. It was a smear campaign, and in a tight-knit industry like ours, reputation was everything. If people believed I was vindictive, that I would sabotage a client just to spite my father, my career would be over. No one trusts a rogue operator. Elias watched me closely. I did not validate it, obviously. I told them you have been exemplary here. But Mudsticks, Chloe, you might want to get ahead of this. Thank you for telling me, I said. My voice was calm, but inside, I was nuclear. I went back to my office. I locked the door. I sat at my desk and stared at the Chicago skyline. They had crossed the final line. They hadn't just exploited me. Now they were trying to destroy me to save face. They were willing to torch my professional future to cover up Sloan's mess. I didn't cry. I didn't call Reed to scream. I didn't post a defensive rant on LinkedIn. I opened my laptop. I went to my personal cloud storage. I opened the folder marked Crestfield Archives. Inside was the transition log, PDF. It contained timestamps of every file I handed over. It contained screenshots of the system health on my last day, showing everything was green. Everything was organized. But more importantly, I had the audit trail. I had the logs showing exactly who accessed the system after I left. I had the logs showing the command executed by user S. Donovan on the Tuesday before the expo. Command delete archive batch 04. Command disable mandatory validation. I had proof. Digital, time-stamped, irrefutable proof that Sloan had deleted the routing maps herself, likely because she didn't know what they were and wanted to clean up the desktop. I looked at the file. If I released this, it wouldn't just clear my name, it would expose them. It would show the world that Reed was a liar and Sloan was grossly negligent. It would humiliate them publicly. I had spent my life protecting them. I had spent my life keeping their secrets, fixing their mistakes, hiding their flaws. I hovered my mouse over the attach button on a new email draft. To Ethics/Committee. Logistics Association. Org. cclegalbiocore.com. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to let the truth do what it does best. I was going to let it destroy the lie. The war for the soul of Crestfield Event Freight did not happen on a battlefield. It happened in the quiet, desperate corners of text messages and the sterile legal language of compliance audits. 2 weeks after I declined Reed's insulting offer to return as a subordinate to my sister, Sloan launched her final offensive. She realized that she could not fix the logistics, so she decided to buy the loyalty I had earned over 4 years. It started with Miller. I was sitting in my office at Summit Harbor, reviewing a route map for a heavy-haul corridor through the Dakotas, when my personal phone buzzed. It was Miller. He never called during shift hours unless something was on fire. "Chloe," he said, his voice low. I could hear the echo of the warehouse behind him. "I need you to be straight with me. Always. Miller, what is going on?" "Sloan just pulled me into her office," he said. "She offered me a promotion. Director of Fleet Maintenance. She offered me $85,000 a year. That is a $30,000 bump. Chloe, she said she wants to lock in the core talent." I closed my eyes. 85,000. Reed barely had enough liquidity to keep the diesel tanks full. "Miller," I said carefully, "did she give you that in writing?" "She gave me an offer letter," he said, "but she said the raise kicks in next quarter. She said they are waiting for a capital injection to clear." "There is no capital injection," I said. "The bank froze the credit line when I pulled my guarantee. They are bleeding cash. She is buying time with money she does not have. She is terrified you are going to leave, and she is promising you a future that does not exist." There was a long silence on the line. "I have a baby coming, Chloe," Miller whispered. "I want to believe her. 85,000 that changes my life." "I know," I said, and my heart ached for him. "But ask yourself this. If they could not pay me market rate when I was running the whole show, how can they pay you that much when they are losing clients every day? It is bait. Miller, do not sign a non-compete. Do not sign anything that locks you in." "She is hitting Sarah too," Miller said. "And the lead rigger. She is throwing big numbers at everyone who knows how the system works. She is trying to rebuild the brain she drove away," I said. "But she is using monopoly money." "Thanks, Chloe," Miller said. "I think I'm going to call your cousin at FedEx." I hung up. I felt a surge of cold anger. Sloan was playing with people's livelihoods now. She was weaponizing their hope against their survival. But while Sloan was trying to bribe the crew, the machinery of the industry was coming for the company. The next blow was not one I struck. It was self-inflicted, born of pure arrogance. When I was the operations manager, I had negotiated a strict enterprise license for our scheduling software, Logitrack. It was expensive software, charged by the seat, meaning we paid for every unique user who had administrative access. To save money, I had limited the admin seats to 3: me, Reed, and the lead dispatcher. Everyone else had view-only access. After I left, Sloan apparently found the permission settings too restrictive. She didn't want to wait for a dispatcher to approve a route change. She wanted everyone to be empowered. So, she went into the admin panel using Reed's password. Since she didn't have her own, and she granted administrative rights to 15 different users. She gave full access to the sales team, the interns, and her assistant. She didn't read the contract. Logitrack had an automated audit bot. When it detected a 300% spike in administrative users on a small business license, it didn't send a warning. It sent an invoice and a cease and desist. I found out because Reed tried to blame me. I received an email from Crestfield's external counsel, forwarded to my lawyer. Jessica. Subject, software violation liability claim, Ms. Lopez. Crestfield Event Freight is currently facing a penalty of $42,000 from Logitrack Systems for license violations. Mr. Donovan asserts that you set up the account architecture and that these violations are a result of your legacy configuration. We are seeking indemnification for this penalty. I stared at the screen. $42,000. They were drowning, and they were trying to use me as a life raft. I called Jessica immediately. "This is a joke, right?" I asked. "They are desperate," Jessica said. "They are throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Do you have the documentation?" "I have everything," I said. I opened my transition log again. I found the email I had sent to Reed on my last day. Subject account handoff, Logitrack. Date, 2 weeks ago. Body Reed. I have removed my user profile from the Logitrack system. Currently, there are 3 active admin seats, which is the maximum allowed under our Tier 2 license. If you need to add more users, you must upgrade the subscription to Tier 3, which costs an additional $2,000 a month. Do not add admin users without upgrading, or we will face penalty audits. I took a screenshot of the email. I took a screenshot of the system log from my final day, showing exactly 3 users. Then I pulled the new audit log that Logitrack had attached to their claim. It showed the user S. Donovan creating 12 new admin accounts on the Tuesday after I left. I drafted the reply to Jessica. "Please find attached the evidence that the system was compliant upon my departure. The violations occurred under the user profile of Sloan Donovan, 10 days after my resignation. Despite my explicit written warning, if they pursue this claim, I will countersue for defamation and legal fees." Jessica sent it. The claim died within an hour, but the damage to Crestfield was done. Logitrack suspended their account until the fine was paid. The dispatch board went black. For 3 days, Crestfield had to run a logistics company using whiteboards and text messages. They missed pickups. They lost trailers. The chaos was absolute. The industry was watching. You cannot hide a meltdown of this magnitude. At Summit Harbor, the rumors I had heard earlier, the ones about me being a saboteur, began to shift. The truth was leaking out. Drivers talk at truck stops. Vendors talk at bars. The narrative changed from "Chloe broke the system" to "Chloe was the only thing holding that place together." My boss, Elias Thorne, stopped by my office on a Thursday afternoon. He closed the door. "You have been getting calls," he said. It wasn't a question. "A few," I admitted. "Old clients, vendors, they are asking if I'm coming back. And I tell them I am happy where I am," I said. "I tell them the truth. I am not involved." Elias nodded. He walked over to the window and looked out at the rail yards below. "We have been monitoring the situation at Crestfield," he said. "They have lost 3 major contracts in the last month. BioCore is gone. The Automotive Expo is gone. Now the software audit. Their credit rating has been downgraded to junk status." He turned to look at me. His expression was serious, devoid of the usual corporate pleasantries. "We are thinking about making a move. Chloe." My stomach tightened. "A move. Acquisition," Elias said. "Distressed asset purchase. We do not care about the brand. The Crestfield name is toxic right now, but we want the assets. They have 40 trucks. They have a lease on a warehouse in a prime location near the port, and they have a crew of drivers who are some of the best in the business, drivers trained by you." I sat very still. Summit Harbor wanted to eat Crestfield. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because if we buy them," Elias said, "we are not keeping the management. Reed is out. Sloan is out. We are buying the hardware and the labor, And we need someone to lead the integration. We need someone who knows the fleet, knows the crew, and knows where the bodies are buried. He paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. We want you to run the acquisition. Chloe, we want you to go in there, evaluate the assets, decide who stays and who goes, and absorb it into Summit Harbor. I felt a rush of vertigo. It was the ultimate victory. I wouldn't just be returning. I would be returning as the conqueror. I would walk into that building not as a daughter, but as the representative of the entity that owned them. I could save Miller. I could save Sarah. I could give them the stability and benefits of a major corporation, but to do it, I would have to sit across the table from my father and sign the paper that erased his life's work. I would have to be the one to tell him that his empire was being sold for parts. I need time to think, I said. Take the weekend, Elias said. But do not take too long. The bank is circling. If we do not buy them, they go to auction. And if they go to auction, your people, Miller, Sarah, they lose everything. He left the office. I sat there for a long time. The conflict was a physical pain in my chest. Part of me, the part that was still the little girl wanting approval, wanted to run away. I didn't want to be the executioner. I didn't want to see the look in Reed's eyes when he realized I was the one holding the pen. But the other part of me, the woman who had been exploited, diminished, and smeared, knew that this was the only way to save the things that actually mattered, the people, the work. If I said no, Crestfield would die a messy death. The trucks would be repossessed. The staff would be fired with no severance. Reed would be left with nothing but debt. If I said yes, I could control the landing. It would be a crash landing. But I could save the passengers. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Reed. I stared at it. Usually, his texts were demands or accusations. This one was different. It was short. It was devoid of capitalization, which for Reed meant he was typing with one hand, likely holding a drink with the other. Bail me out. Please. I can't fix this. Then, a second message bubbled up. Buffet just called. They are pulling the loan. I need you, Chloe. But I'm also afraid you are right. I am also afraid you are right. He wasn't admitting I was right about the salary, or the software, or Sloan. He was admitting I was right about him, that he wasn't the genius, that he wasn't the leader, that without me, he was just a man standing in an empty warehouse, shouting at trucks that wouldn't move. I looked at the Summit Harbor logo on my wall. I picked up my phone. I didn't reply to Reed. I called Elias. Drop the papers, I said. I will lead the integration. Good, Elias said. We will set the meeting for Monday. One condition, I said. I walk in first. Before the lawyers, I want 10 minutes with the current owners alone. Done, Elias said. I hung up. I was going back, but I wasn't going back to save the family business. I was going back to bury it so that something healthy could grow in its place. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I felt a strange, cold resolve. The daughter was gone. The victim was gone. The CEO had just arrived. I parked my car in the spot marked Visitor. It was the same spot where Sloan's Range Rover used to sit, the spot that had symbolized the beginning of the end. Now, my sedan sat there, not as a symbol of status, but as an instrument of business. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a navy suit, tailored and sharp, no safety vest, no grease stains. I took a breath, inhaling the recycled air of the climate control, and stepped out into the humid Indiana afternoon. The smell hit me instantly. Diesel, dust, and ozone. It was the scent of my 20s. It was the smell of sacrifice. But today, it didn't smell like home. It smelled like an asset to be evaluated. I met Elias Thorne and the Summit Harbor legal team at the front entrance. Elias nodded to me. He handed me a thick folder. Ready, he asked. Ready, I said. We didn't use the employee entrance. We walked through the front glass doors, the ones Sloan had insisted on frosting with a decorative pattern that was already peeling at the corners. The receptionist, a new girl I didn't recognize, looked up in panic at the phalanx of suits marching toward the conference room. She reached for the phone, presumably to warn Reed, but we were already past her. I opened the door to the conference room without knocking. Reed and Sloane were already there. They were sitting on the far side of the mahogany table, a table I remembered polishing myself before client meetings because we couldn't afford a cleaning service. Reed looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. The bluster, the broad-shouldered arrogance that had filled rooms for 3 decades, had deflated. He was hunched over a stack of bank notices, his tie askew. Sloane sat next to him. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide swollen eyes. When she saw me, she stiffened, her posture shifting from defeat to defensive aggression. "What is she doing here?" Sloane hissed, looking at Elias. "We are negotiating with Summit Harbor, not her." I walked to the head of the table and pulled out the chair. I sat down, placing the folder in front of me. I waited for the rest of my team to settle before I looked at my sister. "I am Summit Harbor," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the tremor that used to plague me in this room. "I am the integration lead for this acquisition. Any terms discussed today go through me. Any paper signed today crosses my desk." Reed looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked from Elias to me, and I saw the realization hit him. He wasn't dealing with a competitor he could charm. He was dealing with the architect of his own machine, returning to salvage the parts. "Chloe," Reed said, his voice raspy, "you came back. I am here to close the deal." "Reed," I corrected him. "We have 45 minutes before the bank's foreclosure deadline at 5 o'clock. Let's not waste time." Elias slid the purchase agreement across the table. It was heavy. It landed with a thud that echoed in the silence. "The offer is simple," I began, opening my copy. "Summit Harbor assumes the assets of Crestfield Event Freight. That includes the fleet of 40 trucks, the warehouse lease, and the existing client contracts. We do not assume the debt. The debt remains with the Donovan estate." "That bankrupts me," Reed whispered. "If you do not take the debt, the bank takes the house. They take the boat. They take everything." "The purchase price for the assets is $2 million, I said. "That should cover the outstanding lien on the fuel credit line and the penalties from Biocore. It leaves you with 0, but it keeps you out of bankruptcy court. It is a clean break." Sloane slammed her hand on the table. "This is robbery," she shouted. "The brand alone is worth $5 million. We have a social media presence. We have a narrative." I turned to Sloane. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sneer. I just looked at her with the clinical detachment of an auditor. "Sloane," I said, "what is the current operating cost per mile for the fleet?" She blinked. "What?" "The cost per mile," I repeated. "Is it $2.50? Is it $3? Do you know the number?" "That is a detail," she scoffed. "I focus on the big picture." "The big picture is made of details," I said. "Since you took over, the cost per mile has risen to $4.20 because of emergency repairs and inefficient routing. You are losing money every time a wheel turns. The brand isn't worth $5 million. The brand is a liability. We are buying the trucks because they are metal and rubber have value. Your narrative has none." Sloane opened her mouth to argue, but Reed reached out and touched her arm. "Stop," he said softly. "She is right." Sloane recoiled, as if he had slapped her. "Dad, you are taking her side. She planned this. She sabotaged us so she could come back here and humiliate us." "I did not sabotage you, Sloane," I said. "I left. You crashed the car because you never learned how to drive. And now, I am the only tow truck in town." I turned back to Reed. "There are conditions to this purchase," I said. "Non-negotiable conditions." Reed rubbed his face with his hands. "Go on." "Clause 4B, I said, flipping the page. "Retention of essential personnel. Summit Harbor guarantees employment for the next 12 months for the entire warehouse and driving staff. No layoffs. Full benefits transition. Their tenure at Crestfield counts toward their seniority at Summit Harbor." Reed looked at me, surprised. "You are protecting the crew." "Someone has to," I said. "Miller, Sarah, the rigging team. They stay. If you want this buyout, you sign that protection clause." What about me? Sloane asked, her voice smaller now. Do I stay? I looked at the paperwork. This was the part I had wrestled with the most. The vengeful part of me wanted to fire her on the spot, but the professional part of me knew that would look petty. We have a role for you, I said. Sloane straightened up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Director. Consultant, I said. Transition consultant, non-operational. You will have no authority over staff, no access to the financial systems, and no access to the routing logic. You will be paid a flat fee for 3 months to answer questions about client histories. After that, the contract expires. You are stripping me of everything, she whispered. You are taking my office. You are taking my title. I am taking the steering wheel out of your hands before you kill someone, I said. You can keep the title on LinkedIn if it makes you feel better, but you are not running this floor. The room fell silent. The air conditioner hummed. Reed looked down at the contract. He picked up a pen. His hand was shaking. I built this, he said, his voice trembling. 30 years. Chloe, I started with one van. I built an empire. You built a business, Dad, I said gently, but you forgot to build a foundation. You thought you could run it on charisma and family loyalty forever. But the market doesn't care about your last name. It cares about competence. I thought, he paused, looking at Sloane, then at me. I thought I was setting you up. I thought you were the strong one. I thought you could handle the background work so she could shine. You didn't think I was a person, I finished for him. You thought I was a utility, and when the utility stopped working, you realized you didn't know how to keep the lights on. Reed closed his eyes. He let out a long, shuddering breath. If I sign this, he said, it is over. The Donovan name is off the building. The name comes down, I confirmed. But Miller keeps his house, Sarah keeps her health insurance, and you walk away without a bankruptcy filing on your record. It is a mercy. Reed. He looked at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the judgmental father or the demanding boss. I saw a tired, defeated man who finally recognized that the daughter he had undervalued was the only reason he was sitting in a chair and not a courtroom. He nodded slowly. Where do I sign? I pointed to the line at the bottom of the page. He signed. The scratching of the pen was the loudest sound in the world. Then he pushed the papers back to me. It is yours, he said. I signed my name below his. Chloe Lopez, Integration Lead, Summit Harbor. I closed the folder. Funds will be wired to the escrow account by morning, Elias said, standing up. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Reed didn't stand up. He just sat there, staring at the table. Sloane was crying silently behind her sunglasses. I stood up. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I just felt light, the weight of their expectations, their drama, their chaos. It was all gone. I will be on the floor, I said. I have to brief the team. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I walked out onto the warehouse floor. It was shift change. The main bay doors were open, letting in the late afternoon sun. The dust motes danced in the light. Miller was there, by the forklift charging station. Sarah was standing next to him, holding a clipboard. They looked terrified. They knew the meeting was happening. They were waiting for the axe to fall. When they saw me, they froze. I walked over to them. The sound of my heels on the concrete was steady, confident. Chloe? Miller asked, his voice tight. Are we done? I stopped in front of them. I looked at the crew that had been my real family for 4 years. Crestfield is done, I said. Miller's shoulders slumped. Sarah put a hand to her mouth. But you are not, I continued. Summit Harbor has acquired the fleet. I am leading the transition. I just signed the clause that guarantees every single job in this building. No layoffs. Your tenure carries over. And Miller, your raise the real one, the one that fits the market budget, is in the new payroll system effective Monday. Miller stared at me. His eyes welled up. He dropped his shop rag. You came back, he whispered. You actually came back for us. I told you, I said, a small smile touching my lips. I route the trucks. I don't leave cargo behind. Sarah grabbed me in a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't a corporate hug. It was a desperate, grateful embrace. Thank you, she sobbed into my shoulder. Thank you, thank you. I held her for a moment, looking over her shoulder at the office window. I saw Reed standing there, looking down at us. He was watching the crew hug me. He was watching the loyalty he had demanded, but never earned being freely given to the daughter he had pushed away. He raised his hand and touched the glass. A ghost of a wave. I didn't wave back. I nodded. Once, a closing of the book, I pulled away from Sarah. All right, I said, my voice returning to its professional cadence. Dry your eyes. We have a transition to execute. Miller, I want a full inventory of the fleet by tomorrow noon. Sarah, I need you to pull the driver logs for the last 30 days. We are going to scrub this operation until it shines. We do it right. We do it by the book. Yes, boss, Miller shouted, grinning. Copy that, boss, Sarah said, wiping her face. I walked toward the loading dock, looking out at the line of trucks. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The ugly silver bird logo on the side of the trailer looked less permanent now. I knew the paint crew would be here on Monday to cover it with the Summit Harbor blue. I took a deep breath. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I wasn't the sister. I wasn't the victim. I was Chloe Lopez, and for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. I had walked through the fire of my family's dysfunction, and I hadn't just survived. I had engineered my way out. I walked to the edge of the dock and looked at the horizon. Some people say you can't choose your family. That is true. But you can choose your terms. You can choose your worth. And most importantly, you can choose when to walk away and when to walk back in through the front door. If you were me standing on that dock, with the keys to the kingdom finally in your hand, but the bridge to your father burned to ash, would you feel regret? Or would you feel the wind on your face and realize that for the first time, it was blowing at your back? Would you go back to be loved, or would you walk away to finally, truly live? Thank you so much for listening to the conclusion of Chloe's story. It has been a wild ride from that first graduation snub to this final boardroom showdown. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe winding down at home? Let me know in the comments below. I love seeing our community map light up from all over the world. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of karma, resilience, and professional revenge, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Smash that like button, and if you really want to support the channel, hit that hype button so we can get these stories out to more people who need a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just massive success. Stay strong, know your worth, and I'll see you in the next story.